All right, welcome in everyone. UGA football live with JC Shelton. Second time we're on today. Instant reactions here. We'll talk Georgia, Florida. Um, we'll start this way. Georgia survives a very late scare, I might add. The game was not over in the fourth quarter. Survives a scare against a Florida team, probably the better Florida team that has shown up to that game the last 3 years. Gets away with 3 interceptions on the day, 2 in the first half, and still walks out with a 14-point win. Um, yeah, so it's hard to quantify what's happening with Carson Beck, right? Everybody's trying to put their finger on it. I have yet to see a good example of what's going wrong. I think he lost his confidence after the second pick. I think that is apparent. Um, I think Mike Bobo did a good job in the second half of working with that and trying to build his confidence. He throws another one there in the second half early, and it's so easy to get rattled after that. You could clearly see he was frustrated with himself, shaking his head on the bench minutes after those interceptions. Georgia stuck with him. You saw Kirby Smart in his ear. You saw Gunnar Stockton talking to him, Rashada talking to him. His teammates, Tate Ratledge, an anchor on the offensive line, a guy that's played with Beck for a long time now. You saw him trying to encourage him. And I think all things considered, teammates plus coaches and then show him their loyalty in Beck helped him get out of that slump there in the second half, because after that third interception, he went 12 for 14 for 142 and 2 touchdowns after that third interception. That was impressive. And it's kind of gotten to this trend where he turns the ball over early. Errant passes, sailing on him. Screen plays where he's throwing it behind the momentum of the receiver. And that does create issues, right? And you get off the field early. You keep your defense on the field way longer than they should be. And he got out of that. And eventually, with the game basically on the line, 20-20 there in the fourth quarter, Georgia needed a drive. All the momentum was on Florida. All the pressure was on Georgia, because that's a 4-3 team. That is a team that would like nothing more than to take down number 2 Georgia in Jacksonville and ruin that chance at an SEC championship for the Dogs. They would like nothing more than that. They had a lot of backups in the game. Obviously, the DJ Lagway situation turned this game on its heels for the Gators. And even besides all of that, and with the pressure on Georgia in a 2020 game, the drive of the day comes down to on Beck's shoulders. It's 3rd and 10. Arian Smith does a great job of getting open. They were on the same page. And Beck checked into that play at the line of scrimmage. He got the play off like 1 second left, finds Arian Smith, and then that sets up that scoring drive, right? And after that play, Georgia offensively did what it wanted. Obviously, the pick by C.J. Allen helped a lot there with field position. It was easy from there, but I was impressed with Carson Beck's poised in that moment. Now, I'll start it with positives because, these are kids we're talking about. A lot of pressure on these guys, and I know for Beck, too, he takes it very seriously. And he's probably going to be, as we speak, he's probably talking to reporters right now and telling them that it's on him and he has to be better. And he does. So we'll start off with positives. But the negative thing is it's becoming more clear to me that this Georgia team is going to be very, very reliant on that defense, which played another good game today. I know you can't be perfect. I thought Florida's going to get completely shut out in the second half. Mistakes here and there. I know there were a lot of holding calls that weren't called on Florida, but we're used to that, right? You can't say anything about that too much. It's not going to change the dang thing. Florida gets the edge here and there, a couple of holes missed, but that's how you beat Georgia. You get the edge, and then a couple of mistakes in the back end with penalties. You let Florida score that late touchdown. But if that defense plays at that level for the rest of the year, Georgia's going to be in every game. Georgia very well might win every game. But as far as having an offense that can go get you points when you need it, I think, at least in crunch time, Georgia has that. But as far as consistently putting up points and consistently getting first down, putting together long drives, keeping that defense fresh. I don't see that happening. And I put a lot of stock in this Kirby Smart team getting better throughout the season, and they usually do, and that's championship football, baby. All the best ones, coaches, programs, historically, you get better as the season rolls on. And I think that defense is getting better. And, getting guys back from injury has been a help. We talked about Michael Williams and Warren Brinson before on our earlier show today before the game. And, I named a key for me was, how's that defensive line going to perform? Because we saw them play really, really well against Texas, right? And that was the healthiest they had been up to that point. And then today, they also think they played really well. It was a different game, though, right? And DJ Lagway at first, he was making plays. That kid is an absolute stud. I hated to see him go out. And I think Georgia in that program would feel the same way. They want both teams at full strength there. And I hope he's able to come back this season. I'm not sure. That hamstring injury, those are really, really tough to come back from. And especially of where he hurt it, up near his butt. So he might be out for some time, but he's an absolute stud. Was impressed with him and what an arm on that kid, poised to in the pocket. But once he goes out, Florida had nothing going, right? You got a third string guy who's taken 0 reps with the first team. You've got injuries all over the place, and they were still able to move the ball here and there. I think Georgia, especially in the fourth quarter, Florida was going after it, right? They nothing to lose. They're putting the ball in the air, and Georgia's secondary played well. And you got Dan Jackson back there. You got Jonell Aguero, and KJ Bolden had a nice day. So I think it was just impressive all around because that defense was on the field a lot in the second half, and Georgia was 3 and out in the wrong positions as well, because that just gave Florida the ball right back. They were trying to hound the ball down the inside and on the edge, and I think Georgia's rush defense did good on there. Let's see, 3.0 yards per carry for Florida. They ran it 38 times. They kind of had to with that situation at quarterback. The Georgia defense really held up because how many times in the past have we seen, and especially when Georgia was really getting railed in Jacksonville, we saw Florida really have a lot of success rushing the ball, and usually the team that rushes the ball the best wins, and that's the case today. Georgia, 146 yards, 4.4 yards per carry. Trevor Etienne goes out early, late in the second quarter, rather. He goes to the locker room early, didn't come back. I've heard it was rib. And you put Nate Frazier, a true freshman, in there, and it's like, hey, it's your game, man. Go get it. Him and Cass Jones. And was impressed with that. I mean, that's a very tough position to be in. And Nate Frazier and Georgia and Kirby Smart, they talk about it. He's still a very, very young player. Not great in pass pro yet. You see Carson Beck trying to help him out, get him in the right spot sometimes. But as a pure ball carrier, I mean, he's going to be really, really good for this team. So I think he performed well in that position and had some poise about him. And then Dwight Phillips Jr. there, true freshman as well. I think that was his first touch, and he goes for a touchdown. So that running back rotation, they stepped up. I mean, that's really important because that's how George was able to put away that game and at least get their defense a break here and there, right? It could have been a lot worse than that because you already have Branson Robinson out, Roderick Robinson out. Then your ETN goes, that's your top 3 right there. And he really couldn't tell it. Nate Frazier's the dog. And that team, we ended up running the ball really well in this game. 455 to 228, outgained them. Right? It's just the interceptions. This could have easily been a 52 to 20 game if you still want to give them the 20. Right? And probably less points than that if you take away the interceptions. Right? I just don't know what Carson Beck's seeing. I don't know if he's pushing it. I know his footwork tends to get really sloppy the longer he's in the pocket, oddly enough. I guess he's feeling pressure that's not there. We've seen that happen before, right? And against Texas, it was kind of the same story. He's now throwing, 11 interceptions in the last 5 games. He threw 6 all season in 2023. Let's go to Ray Roper here on Facebook. I think Kirby needs to bench Beck to get him out of his own head. Something is wrong with him. When it comes to benching quarterbacks like that, especially a guy who led you to a 13-1 record a year ago, 3-point loss in the SEC championship game, should have been the playoff, first team in college football playoff history to go from 1 out of the top 4 in the final week. Right? A guy that finished 3rd in the country in passing yards, a guy that routinely engineered second half comebacks. Last year, I think there's 2. When it comes to benching a guy like that you've stuck behind, I don't know. very testy because you've seen it. Sometimes it works, right? Sometimes it does in football, but most of the time it doesn't. I mean, that hurts your confidence then because you put him back in and he's always going to remember how he got taken out. So it might even up the pressure in his mind and maybe his poise falls apart. Um, but I think that's a conversation that Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo probably had during the game, right? And I think it also it probably trickles down to how good do we feel about Gunnar Stockton, who's not played in a big game, who's only gotten garbage time snaps in his entire career. How good do you feel about Rashada as a guy who just joined the team in the offseason and he's still learning? And guys, he was not perfect at Arizona State. I know you can pull out some highlights here and there, but he had his own issues too, turning the ball over. We'll go to Robert Louis Bailey on Facebook. Appreciate you throwing a comment up, Robert. Tight ends blocked well, and the wide receiver stepped up today. Also, really pleased with the receiver play. Was there one drop? I might be wrong on that. I think Dylan Bell, but it was kind of a high pass that Beck put on him. Yeah, I think that might have been the only one. I know Benjamin Urasek had one in the end zone, right? But his feet, he was getting let out of bounds anyway. But I'm impressed because guys, if you tuned in on our instant or not our instant reactions, but our pregame show, and then all throughout the really last 2 weeks, we've been talking about drops. And Arthur Lynch gets on here and he talks about how it's a fixable issue. And we talked about that earlier today. And I was hoping to see some improvement there, and I think it was from the receiver group. So that's a good job by them. And Arian Smith, I mean, I already talked about him and that big catch he had on that third down that led to that touchdown, Georgia to take the lead, 27-20. Oscar Delp, we had a sighting of him. Benjamin Urasek played well. All things considered, and you were missing Anthony Evans, so you had Jacoby White playing snaps. You had London Humphreys taking on a big role. Right, I think there were plays to be made, and I do want to say, Mike Bobo called a really good game. I think so. Plays were out there to be made. Guys were running open. Had some miscommunication. Obviously, Beck had some get away from him, and then thrown into triple coverage. I think that was all 3 times triple coverage. It might have been one that was double. Yeah, I think the first one was double. But I mean, you gotta think, like, why are you forcing that ball there? But in the very end, we can talk about this for hours too. We'll see what Carson and Kirby says after this game too. I'll be interested in that. But we could talk about that all day. The reality is, I think Kirby Smart, knowing him, he's not going to put another guy in there until something catastrophic happens. I'm talking about 3 pick sixes and a couple more, maybe go on top of it. Because in the end, he knows he can rely on Carson in the end of the game when he needs it most, right? The issue, and we're a forward-thinking podcast, folks, is the issue is against championship caliber teams where you can't afford to do that, which Texas, that's why that Georgia defense stepped up so much against Texas, because it's kind of a similar first half performance, right, guys? But Carson answers in the second half, right? He answers when Georgia absolutely needs it the most. You're going to get into a situation, though, when you're playing a better offense, and it might be next week, guys. It might be against Ole Miss. Ole Miss put up, how much did they put up? It was like 56 points. 56 points today on Arkansas, something like that. Jackson Dart had 5 touchdowns. It might be next week to where your defense has some issues, and that's a lot of talent. That's a Lane Kiffin offensive scheme. Georgia, took care of business last year in Athens, 52-17. This is on the road now. This is in Oxford, baby. Hostile environment. Maybe this is the game where Georgia's defense doesn't have a great day. And then how does Carson Beck play then? All right, because that's when you absolutely need points instead of the fourth quarter, in the second, in the first, maybe, depending on how that offense rolls for Ole Miss. So that's, I guess, and I know Georgia fans are concerned on that, and I agree. If you're talking about, championships, that's what you want. You want to get in the SEC championship, get to Atlanta, college football playoff. A bye would be nice. You want to get there. I think offensively, I'm just not seeing that team that can stay in a shootout with folks. And it reminds me of that 21, because I don't think this defense is that good. I mean, it's probably a generational defense, but it's more like 21 where Georgia's offense wasn't firing all cylinders all the time. You had games where Stetson Bennett and company stepped up really big. Then you also had others where it was a battle, like that game against Bama in the national championship. Points were hard to come by for the majority of that game, right? And that's kind of the concern there, because I'm just not seeing it. I mean, it's, we're 8 games in, right? 8 games in, And this is where you start to see a trend either upward or downwards. We're kind of seeing a flat line for this offense right now. And it's really, it's all mistakes. And unfortunately, it is on Beck. And, Kirby Smart said in the offseason, he said, sorry, folks, Mike went out. Kirby Smart said that Carson Beck, where he takes us, we'll go. And right now, we're kind of getting bailed out a little bit by this defense. Now, positives are is that defense is really, really good. And across the country, I don't think, you look at Ohio State and what they did in the first 5 games and then what they've done the last few. I know they beat Penn State today, but the offense haven't been firing. Look what Oregon did. Probably Oregon might be the most consistent offensive team right now. But other than that, I think there's anybody can be beaten on any given day, and that Georgia defense is special enough to where, they might be able to dominate a lot of these teams. So there's definitely a path for Georgia, I think, to win the national championship. It's hard to bet against them. They just don't lose, man. I mean, one regular season loss in the last 3 seasons. So it's just it's really interesting when you think about that because I swear I've yet to see a good reason for this. And I wrote a post for Athlon Sports because we basically polled Georgia fans at halftime, being like, "Hey, thoughts." So we didn't say, what do you think of Carson Beck? We just said thoughts, and a lot of you guys responded with, sit Beck and such. And at this point in the season, you don't want to hear that. But it could be a situation to where this is kind of the game that Beck needed to light his fire a little bit. Because, there's so many distractions out there too, guys. I'm not saying this is the reason for it. We're just spitballing here. But, with the NIL era, social media everywhere, so many distractions here and there. You keeping the main thing. That's the really, really hard part for these guys. And they're basically being ushered in as professionals now at a much, much younger age. And can everybody handle it? Right? Because I think there was less distraction for Carson last year because people didn't know what to expect. First-year starter, sat behind Stetson Bennett, waited his turn, had the talent, had the arm talent. It was evident in practice, evident when he got his chances. You heard it all from the Georgia staff behind the scenes. And now when the pressure is maybe at the greatest, he's folding at times. And I think really what could help too is a running game with a full stable backfield. Because ETN was running really well, right? He gets hurt, run game kind of stalls for a while, and then it comes in on the end. I think the offensive line played well because I know Beck got some late pressure here and there. I think he got a sack on him as well. Let me see. He got 2 sacks on him today. Got some late pressure at times, but a lot of the times, man, he had all day to throw, and those picks were late throws. Man, maybe it's that thing where it's too aggressive. It's more of drop it off, man. Take a sack when you need to. Rather have sacks than interceptions. Absolutely, baby. In that drive with a kick. All right. So these are all things that they're going to be working on. Will it happen though? Will more efficiency become of this offense? Because that's what Georgia needs, I think, to really get to the end of the season with a trophy in their hands. But like I said earlier, there's always another side of these things, and that defense is playing so well. I could see Georgia staying in defensive battles like this and then coming out on top if they need it because Carson Beck's shown he can come back and he can play well at the end. Let's hit up Ernest Miller here on Facebook. Every win they get going forward will be in spite of Carson, not because of him. Looks like a freshman quarterback coach needs to remind Beck that he has to go his check downs or throw the ball away. Yeah, that's what I'm saying too. Yeah, I think he came into this season wanting to be more aggressive, and it's worked at times, and sometimes it hasn't. And then lately, it's just I don't know what it is. 11 interceptions in 5 games for a guy who threw 6 last year. That alone is wild to me. And it could be pushing because of the receiver issues. Those receiver rotation has been decimated at times, right? And then you're losing a couple big weapons from last year, right? It could be one of those things to where he's trying to find guys he can rely on. And Arthur Lynch and I talk about got to have it, guys. Those guys you throw it up to and say, go get it, and you know that we're going to be in the right spot and such. All right, so there's miscommunications there. And there's also an opportunity where, Carson Beck against Ole Miss next week goes in a hostile environment, gets some confidence under his belt, plays well, and then moving forward, he can always have that game to rely on and be like, that was my full game, because he hasn't had one yet, right? A full game of playing at the player that we have seen happen. That's why I'm so hesitant to really, turn off turn off the battery on Carson Beck because we've seen him put so many good things on tape, and at times this year, and then especially last year. So it's just about him answering. I'm curious to see what he says after this game, but he's always said the right things after the games. Let's hit on this real quick. Outgained by Florida, over 200 yards. Like I said, the picks just really skewed this game, man. 4.3 yards per rush. 5 big plays for Florida, which is a 15-yard pass or more, 10-yard plus rush, to 13 for Georgia. So the big plays were there, even though Georgia missed a lot of them. Shout out to C.J. Allen. What a great game by that kid, man. Just a sophomore, dude. Just continuing the legend of Georgia linebackers. 8 tackles, 2 quarterback hurries, got a pick as well. Acrobatic pick, jumped up for that one, and he finally, got the Yale transfer to throw one like that. And there's a couple of them earlier that could have been picked, but this one was. Raylan Wilson, 7 tackles, half a sack, QB hurry. Chaz Chambliss, 5 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, had a sack as well. Shout out to Chaz, his final Georgia-Florida game. So the defense, baby, defense. It'll get you through these long SEC seasons. And Georgia gets everybody's best game, man. I mean, that is a team. That is a Florida team who put up 48 points on Kentucky, who should have beat Tennessee in Neyland Stadium. So if I'm a Florida fan watching this, I'm like, man, we had our third-string quarterback in there. We almost beat Georgia, right? So this could – I want Florida to be good. As a Georgia grad, I want Florida to be good. So these games mean a lot more than they had the last 3 years because it's kind of pitiful to me in that aspect. But, I mean, we'll see what Florida does the rest of the year because they have a big stretch coming up here. I think they go to Texas next week. So depending on how they plays, we might look back at this game and be like, man, we got away with one there. And moving on. And the very, to wrap it all up in a pretty box is SEC win, neutral site, rivalry game. You escaped. You're moving on. You're 7-1. Are we 7-1 or 8-1? 7-1. Sorry, 7-1. Long day, folks. 7-1. Moving on to Ole Miss, right? You get Ole Miss and Oxford. Like I said, they had a great day offensively against Arkansas, which Arkansas came in with one of the worst defenses in the SEC in certain areas anyway. Not a huge shocker. Ole Miss happens to do that every now and then. They don't do it every week, but when it hits, they saw something in Arkansas they loved and took advantage of it. 5 touchdown passes for Dart, over 500 yards. So something to watch out for is how does that translate to this Georgia game next week? Because, when you think about last year, Ole Miss was undefeated coming in the night game in Athens against a good Georgia team. They get absolutely blown out. What have they learned from that loss? What has Georgia learned, if anything? A big chess match between one of the best offensive play callers in the sport in Lane Kiffin, an experienced, good quarterback who could also use his feet, which gives every defense problems, including Georgia. And then you have some of the best defensive minds in the sport on the other side, right? So this is going to be an ultimate chess match. Let's see what happens. Kirby Smart took care of Steve Sarkisian and company. He might be 1A, 1B offensive system guy, right? So you do that against Texas. Can you do something similar? And if Beck shows up playing the same, that defense is going to have to be really, really good. Absolutely. All right, but you have a week for it. You have a week. Watch them film and see what he can do. But again, at the very end, I think you get out of this game with a good win, a 2-touchdown win. You're moving on to the meat of your schedule here with Ole Miss and got Tennessee as well in a few weeks in Athens. And Tennessee doesn't beat Georgia in Athens, but that's for a later podcast. We'll talk that one through when it comes to it. But we'll be back next week. Ole Miss, Georgia. We'll get into it. We'll have 2 shows out. Appreciate you watching and listening as always, folks. Really do. And just remind yourself when you lay your head down at night, maybe don't think about Carson Beck. Just think about that 34-20 win against the Florida Gators and moving on, baby. You're moving on, number 2 team in the country. You're sitting pretty in the college football playoff race, and you have an SEC championship to go get. So until next week, we'll talk to you then. Enjoy your night, guys.